Earlier, I spoke with Senator John Kerry of Massachusetts and asked him where we're headed in dealing with bin Laden.
There's a growing awareness that this is very much not like the Gulf War. This is not something where you're going to go in the same way with the same kind of targeting. We have to be more careful here. We have to be more thoughtful. This is a longer haul. It's going to be fought on a number of different fronts: financial, diplomatic, obviously clandestine, and some very direct and military, no question about it.
Well, the idea would be that the Afghanistan government would give him up. What do you think the likelihood of that would be?
Well, you never know. I mean, obviously, the Pakistanis were rebuffed today, but you never know in the end. When nations are united and the handwriting is really clearly on the wall in front of you, you don't quite know how people will then maneuver. Certain individuals, certain movements, certain things can become expendable. Right. I don't know what the answer. I doubt they will do that. But I think it is possible for us to make the Taliban itself pay a price. I mean, you have to remember the vast majority of the Afghanis themselves are poor, and they are victims themselves of the Taliban. So I think that if we direct our efforts in a very surgical, very strategic way, it is possible for us to do this without giving up the values of our country. You know, I talked to a number of families today who lost their dear loved ones, wives, mother, and the families were saying to me, "Senator, we want justice, not revenge. We don't want innocent people killed." I mean, it's fascinating how they were the first to say they had a sense of how this needs to be done. And I think all of us need to be very thoughtful about that.
How do you launch a serious military campaign in a country that's landlocked? How do we get a beachhead? Can we, you know, what I know about it, how do you do it by, for example, airdrop or airlift?
Well, I think ultimately, Chris, look, the first effort is to try to get some help from the neighboring countries. But if in the end those countries are unwilling to do it, then you have to set up the logistics of creating your own beachhead. And clearly we are capable of doing that. If we have to establish some kind of base, forward base, and supply it ourselves, and use that as the base of operations from which we chase after this individual and his cohorts, then that's what we'll have to do. We would prefer, and I hope nations of the world hear this clearly, we want the support of all those who believe that they are properly on the side of decency and of civilization. And we need to have the Muslim world particularly separate themselves from Osama bin Laden and from the Taliban. The Taliban does not represent the Nation of Islam, nor does Osama bin Laden. They are perversions of a great religion. And we need the leaders of that religion to stand up. We need the Arab countries to stand up and make it clear that they separate themselves from this kind of activity.
Such cold third world heroes as Nelson Mandela have said we have to be very careful in nailing the right person. What standard of proof do you think we need to have to present to Muslim nations particularly to nail down the fact it was bin Laden's operation that killed our 5,000 people?
I think you need that standard to be as high as possible because you want it to withstand scrutiny, and you need to obviously persuade people. But I will tell you this, on the basis of what we know already, there is no question in my mind that those nations should be joining us. I mean, after all, this is a man who we know already was responsible for bombing embassies, responsible for helping to take an aircraft out of the air, responsible for helping to bomb the World Trade Center, at least links to it, the first time. And I think all of us understand we've had him under indictment for these last several years. There's no lack of evidence to say that he is an outlaw to humanity, and those nations need to join us in hunting him down.
Let's think really ruthlessly and cold-bloodedly for a moment. Do you think it's possible that bin Laden calculated, not miscalculated, but calculated that we would be encouraged because of the horrendous nature of this crime against us to launch this kind of forward operation, to go to Arabia, to go to Afghanistan in pursuit of him, and he's trying to trap us in a situation where we Westerners are in Arabia and eventually get ourselves in a land war, maybe not like Vietnam, but something horrific like quicksand, and that's where he wants us. Is that possible?
I think that's entirely possible, Chris. There's no question that perhaps one of the things he would have liked was a scenario where we acted out of anger and revenge on the first night. and we started launching missiles, and those missiles killed indiscriminately. And then he stood up and tried to summon the Nation of Islam to his leadership and tries to help kick us out of these other places that we are. I mean, he views us as the great Satan, as the infidel who has invaded his area of life and operations. He views himself as the future leader in that way, of sort of creating the pure Islamic State. But his definition of pure Islamic State is completely different from what the pure religion suggests.
Well, that was my conversation earlier tonight with Senator John Kerry.